A nuclear-powered aircraft carrier can operate for decades without refueling. Sounds unstoppable, but here's what most people don't realize. That same carrier can be forced out of a war by something cheaper than a used car. Not destroyed, just shut down. At first glance, an aircraft carrier looks completely self-sufficient. It generates its own power, it carries its own air force, and it's protected by some of the most advanced defense systems ever built. But there's one thing it cannot produce: fuel for its aircraft. Every jet on that deck runs on JP5, and once that fuel starts running low, everything begins to change. Sorties slow down, mission flexibility drops, and within days the carrier starts losing its ability to fight. So every few days, no matter where it is, the carrier is forced into a routine. It has to meet another ship in open water, slow down, hold position, and refuel. And that moment happens on a clock it cannot control. This refueling process is called underway replenishment. And it's not quick, it can take hours. During that time, the carrier has to maintain a steady speed, usually around 13 knots. It has to hold a straight course, and it has to stay physically connected to another ship using a fuel line stretched across open water. Two massive vessels moving side by side just over 100 feet apart. No sudden turns, no unpredictable movement, just a fixed path in the middle of the ocean. And this isn't optional. At high combat tempo, a carrier burns through massive amounts of fuel every single day. Within 3 to 7 days, its reserves drop to critical levels, which means this refueling process isn't a rare event. It's routine. Now here's where most people get it wrong. They look at this moment and think, this is when the carrier is most exposed. But that assumption misses what actually happens. Because when refueling begins, the entire strike group tightens. Ships close in, formations compress, sensors go into overdrive, aircraft scan hundreds of miles out, destroyers lock in defensive positions. Every layer of protection becomes active at once. This isn't the weakest moment. It's one of the most heavily defended situations you'll ever see. And against traditional threats, it works, which raises a more uncomfortable question. If everything is this well protected, then where's the real vulnerability? Here's the part most people never actually visualize. You're looking at two ships the size of small cities, moving side by side, roughly 100 to 150 feet apart. At sea, that's extremely close. Now imagine trying to hold that distance, perfectly amur for hours. Waves are moving, wind is shifting. Both ships are constantly correcting position. And between them is a fuel line, tight, pressurized, constantly pumping thousands of gallons per minute. If that line snaps, fuel spills instantly. If one ship drifts too far, the entire operation stops. So everything becomes controlled, deliberate, careful, which means speed is limited, movement is restricted, options are reduced, and that's not a tactical choice, that's physics forcing the situation. And once you understand that, something else becomes clear. This entire operation depends on consistency. The ships must stay aligned, the distance must stay exact, the flow of fuel cannot stop. Which means for hours, and the carrier is locked in ship beside it. And once you see it that way, the question changes again. It's no longer about how strong the defense is, it's about what exactly it's defending, and what it isn't. Because historically, threats followed a pattern. If you wanted to cripple a navy, you aimed for the warship. The bigger the target, the better. More impact, more visibility, more strategic value. So naturally, defenses evolved around that idea, layer after layer built to protect the carrier itself. Missiles designed to intercept missiles, radars optimized for fast-moving threats, systems trained to respond to high-speed attacks, everything focused on protecting the most obvious target. But warfare doesn't stay static. It adapts, and sometimes the biggest shift isn't new technology, it's a change in perspective. Because once you stop thinking about what's strongest, you start looking for what everything depends on. And that's where things begin to shift. Right next to the carrier during this process is another ship. It doesn't get attention. No headlines, no dramatic footage, but it carries something far more important than weapons: fuel. This ship is the reason the carrier can keep flying missions. Without it, the jets stop. And when the jets stop, the carrier stops being a carrier. Every launch depends on it. Every mission relies on it. Every hour of operation is tied to what this ship delivers. But here's the part that changes everything. That ship isn't built for combat. It doesn't have advanced radar systems scanning the horizon. It doesn't carry layered missile defenses ready to intercept threats. And it doesn't have the kind of protection you'd expect for something this critical. Most of its defenses are basic, enough for minor threats, not enough for modern attacks. And that imbalance is easy to overlook, because visually, it sits right next to one of the most protected assets on Earth, which creates a false sense of security. But proximity isn't protection. And in a real engagement, every system has a priority. And that priority isn't always the ship beside it. Now here's what makes this even more important. This wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. Decades ago, the system was designed this way on purpose. because fully arming every supply ship would change everything. Costs would multiply, fleet size would shrink, and logistics would become unsustainable. You wouldn't just be protecting supply ships, you'd be turning them into warships, and that breaks the entire balance of how fleets operate. So instead, the design relied on something else: protection by proximity. The carrier and its escorts would defend the oiler, and for decades, that worked, because most threats were built around one idea: attack the warship, break the shield, hit the center. But once that idea changes, once the target shifts from the strongest point to the most essential one, the entire equation changes with it. And that's where the real vulnerability begins to appear. Because modern attacks don't always try to overwhelm defenses with power. They overwhelm them with decisions. Each incoming object forces a response. Track it, classify it, assign a weapon, fire. Now multiply that by multiple targets arriving at slightly different times. Some fast, some slow, some obvious, some barely visible. The system isn't just reacting, it's prioritizing. Every decision has to be made in seconds. Every target has to be evaluated. Every response has to be assigned correctly. And in that process, something subtle happens. Attention gets pulled in multiple directions. Resources get divided, focus gets stretched, and timing becomes everything. Because the system isn't designed to ignore threats. It's designed to handle them. But the more directions you create, the more decisions you force, the higher the chance that something small slips through at exactly the right moment. Not because the system failed, but because it was busy doing everything else perfectly. Now imagine an enemy looking at this setup and thinking differently. Instead of trying to break through the carrier's defenses directly, they change the target. They don't need something expensive. They don't need precision weapons worth millions. They just need something simple and enough of it. So the attack comes in layers. First, fast-moving cruise missiles. These are loud, obvious, and easy to detect early. They grab attention, they trigger the defense systems, they demand immediate response. And exactly as expected, they get intercepted. Far from the fleet, clean, efficient, predictable. Everything looks like it's working perfectly, and that's the point. Because while all of that is happening, something else is already moving in. Slower, lower, harder to see. Cheap drones, they don't move fast. They don't look threatening individually, but they behave differently. They don't rely on speed, they rely on number and timing. They arrive staggered, from slightly different angles, at slightly different moments. By the time they're detected, they're already much closer. Now the defense system shifts again. Missiles launch, close-range systems activate, tracking systems recalibrate. Targets start dropping out of the sky, one after another, and for a moment it looks like the system is holding, like it always does, like it's in complete control. But this isn't about stopping everything. It never was. It's about what happens if just one gets through. Because fuel doesn't just affect whether jets can fly, it affects everything about how the carrier operates, how many missions it can launch, how far those missions can go, how long aircraft can stay in the air. Every decision ties back to it. So when fuel drops below a certain level, the entire operation starts to shift. First, non-essential missions get cut. Training flights disappear, secondary objectives get postponed. Then, offensive operations begin to slow down. Strike missions become selective. Only high-priority targets remain. Then the carrier shifts from attacking to conserving. Aircraft launch less frequently. Time in the air gets reduced. Margins get tighter. And eventually, it reaches a point where staying in the fight becomes a risk. Not because of enemy fire, but because running out of fuel mid-operation is worse. So the carrier does something it was never designed to do in combat. It pulls back. Now rewind just a moment, because all of that starts with something small. One drone survives. It slips through everything. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough to make it past the final layer. And it doesn't head for the carrier. It goes for the ship beside it, the one carrying the fuel. In that moment, everything changes. Alarms trigger instantly. The crew initiates what's called an emergency breakaway. Fuel lines are cut, valves slam shut to prevent spillage, cables retract as fast as possible. The two ships begin to separate. The carrier accelerates hard, turning away from the threat. The other ship moves in the opposite direction. Within seconds, the connection is gone. From the outside, it looks like a success. The carrier is safe. It can maneuver again. It avoided a direct hit. But something critical didn't finish: the refueling. Only part of the fuel was transferred before the breakaway. Not enough for sustained operations, and that creates a different kind of damage. Not explosive, not visible, but far more strategic, because now the carrier is operating on limited reserves. Every decision becomes tighter, every mission becomes constrained, and the clock is still running. The carrier didn't sink. Its defenses worked almost perfectly. Missiles were intercepted, most of the drones were destroyed, but it still lost its ability to operate. not because it was overpowered, but because something it depended on was exposed. And that's the part most people miss. Power doesn't fail where it's strongest, it fails where it relies on something weaker. So the real question isn't how hard it is to destroy a carrier, it's whether disabling it is actually much easier.